You're listening to Fox City's Murder and Mayhem, your bi-weekly dose of true crime history in a small rural community of Wisconsin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Fox City's Murder and Mayhem. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we are back.
Yep.
And where are we headed to today? Hopefully Kaukauna.
Well, it is Kaukauna, but it's going to be more general than that as well.
All right, so what are we talking about?
Well, this is your fault. I want you to know.
Everything's always my fault.
Yeah.
But my faults make the best episodes.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So I had asked you, I said, hey, Eric, do you want an episode about a virus, a Bigfoot, or a murder? And I thought, well, any reasonable person
would say a murder.
Oh yeah, but Eric's like, give me the virus. So
we haven't had a virus in a while, so we're going to talk about a virus in Kaukauna.
Yeah,
weird.
But right. It's not, like I said, it's not specific.
Okay.
So we're actually going to talk about the polio epidemic.
Okay.
Yeah, polio.
Yeah, I know polio.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about polio. I just know it wasn't a very good thing.
You remember having it. So, yeah, this is kind of just a broad thing. I had done a presentation on polio, so I thought I would share that with people, a really scaled-down version of it here. So polio been around, like, forever. But it started getting bad in the 1900s. From 1916 onward, there was a polio epidemic each summer in one part of the country or another. It kind of, it would jump around, and it got even worse and worse up through the 1940s and 1950s. This is bad. People were like, hey, we don't like this to begin with, and it's getting worse. So I should explain what polio is at this point. Polio is a virus, and in most cases, you get it, you're sick for a little bit, and then you recover, and you're fine. But for some people, what happens is it gets in there, and you don't recover, and you become paralyzed, and your legs don't work.
Okay.
Or your arms don't work. And sometimes even if you got it and you recovered, there would be residual traces of it, and your legs or arms would get weaker as you got older.
Okay.
So it kind of stinks in that even if you recover from it, there's a chance that you're going to be dealing with that pretty much forever.
Okay.
So it's not like most illnesses where you either die or you get better. This one you're just kind of stuck with.
Okay.
So to try to fight this, the March of Dimes was started by President Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt was believed to have polio himself. He was in a wheelchair, and it was believed caused by polio. March of Dimes was a thing where he said, everybody can afford a dime. Whether you're rich or poor, you can afford a dime. Send in dimes to help, combat polio. And this was a very successful thing. Lots and lots and lots of people do it. Already in the first few days and weeks, bags and bags and bags of mail were coming in. 50,000 letters with dimes were being sent in. And this was so successful, in fact, that Roosevelt got his face put on a dime.
Because of it, huh?
Yeah.
This is weird because this must have been a thing back in the day. Because up in Minocqua, Wisconsin,
yeah,
there's a museum there. In the first hospital they ever built, the majority of the funding came because high school students had people send in nickels, to raise money to build the hospital.
Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting side note, and I'm sure it's probably in the same era too.
Yeah, it could be, could very well be. Yeah, so. 1944 was a particularly bad year in Wisconsin. Thanks to the March of Dimes now being a thing, research was funded, and some state doctors started looking into it. State scientists were looking into it. And they did an experiment where there was an outbreak in Shorewood, which is near Milwaukee, basically is Milwaukee, and they put in a quarantine into place, and the quarantine made the numbers of people getting polio drop. And this, when I read this, I'm like, this sounds so obvious. But this to them was like a big thing because they didn't know. They didn't know if it was people giving it to each other, if it was where they were getting, where they were buying food from. At this time, the milkman was a big thing, so they thought, well, maybe it was contaminated milk, and these are all people on the same milk route. Mm-hmm. So by this experiment, they found that, well, as long as these people who have it aren't interacting with other people,
nobody else gets
it. So it's not just where they're doing their grocery shopping. So sometimes this would affect things. In 1946, there was an outbreak in Shawano, and this affected Kaukauna because it happened during Kaukauna's homecoming. And they could not have their homecoming football game. The student council president in Kaukauna said, "I will try to make this homecoming the most successful we've ever had, with all the students' cooperation." The local events continued, including the parades and all that stuff. And they even had a bonfire where they burned a giant S, saying, "Screw you, Shawano." But they didn't play them in a football game. So I guess Kaukauna won that one. More people are getting it. When the outbreak went through in 1949, in the United States, there were 42,000 cases. And among those, 2,700 of them, people died. So that's bad. Things are slowly again creeping up, and parents are getting really, really concerned because this is hitting kids the hardest. And they're like, okay, before you make new friends, we got to meet your friends. Got to make sure your friends aren't creepy polio kids. And gatherings were reduced, crowds were reduced. People were kind of hesitant to go to sporting events. Swimming pools became less popular because they were afraid to swim with other people. So
it kind of sounds familiar.
Yep.
Almost plays into the idea that history repeats itself.
Yep. Yep. And I will tell you, when I picked polio as a topic to do a presentation on, I did not have that in mind whatsoever. Mm-hmm. But the more I was reading about the polio and the things that they did to fight it and the statements that the health professionals were saying, it sounded very familiar. It sounded a lot like something that had happened in our own lifetime. And I was like, okay.
For anybody who is not getting this, we're talking about COVID.
I wasn't going to say it. But a strange thing happened in the 1950s. And it used to be that prior to that, the bulk of people who got polio would get it between ages 5 and 9. By the 1950s, it shifted to people 15 and older. And here's why. Because people got better cleanliness.
Okay.
As personal hygiene and clean water and things like that improved, more people avoided it, which meant that they started getting it later. Like the kids were cleaner.
Okay.
This was bad.
So now, hold on though. When you get polio, is polio kind of one of these things where you get it once and then it's kind of done?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you got it between 5 and 9, that's bad, but you could recover. If you get it 15 and older, that's worse because apparently it hits you harder and you have a higher chance of paralysis or death. I'm guessing this is kind of sort of like the chickenpox thing, where they tell you, you want it as a kid because if you get it when you're older, it's not pleasant. Mm-hmm. Not that people are dying of chickenpox all the time, but a similar thing where depending on the age you get, it makes a big difference.
So this is your first argument why nobody should wash their hands, right?
It is funny. It is funny, yeah. This is one of those things where drinking bad water and rolling in the dirt is a benefit. I mean, overall, cleanliness is better for health, but there are some arguments there. Yeah. Okay, by 1950, the county is trying really hard. Outagamie County is trying really hard. People are coming together. They're having regular meetings. They're like, we got to figure this out. Our numbers are going up. The cases are getting worse. They've reached the point where local hospitals can't really help them as much anymore. St. Elizabeth Hospital was like the go-to hospital if you had a real problem. Mm-hmm. But even they were then sending people down to Madison because Madison was considered the best hospital in the state. Okay. So they would send them down to Wisconsin General Hospital in Madison. Often they would get better then because Madison could help, but sometimes they didn't. So there was some interesting things of trying to figure out how to slow this down. The Kaukauna area got their new pool in 1950. And they said, hey, we got a new pool. And we know you guys have been asking for a pool for years. And now that we have a pool, I know you're kind of hesitant because everybody's got polio. And you don't really want to go in the pool. But don't worry. The pool is the best place to be. Because we add chlorine to the water every day. And the chlorine kills the polio.
Okay, so now, is this where chlorine came from in pools?
I think it was around before that, but this seems like when they're explaining it to people that not everybody knows that chlorine is in a pool.
Okay.
So it must be a relatively new thing.
Okay. But it wasn't like they discovered chlorine because of the polio virus or anything like that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But yeah, it's funny. They're like, no, come to the pool. As long as you're in the pool, you're fine. Like, it kills everything. It's like, okay.
I'm going to guess that there are some flaws in that logic. I don't know how polio is spread, but I assume it's like airborne, or is it?
I don't think that it would. I mean, if you had polio and you went in the pool, it's not like your polio would go away. So I don't think it works exactly the way they think it works. But yeah, I don't know. The next time there was the worst outbreak in the country was 1952. Somehow the worst ones just keep coming. In 1952, people were getting real scared because there were 57,000 reported cases that year. 3,000 of them died, and 21,000 of them were left with some level of paralysis. At this point, they're like, you know what we really need? We need a vaccine. They pushed for the March of Dimes to kind of switch towards pushing for a vaccine. Prior to this, they were doing some kind of science experiments, but they were primarily using their funding to help out people after the fact with polio. They're like, here's some crutches and things like that, which is great. But they're like, let's just try to actually find out how this starts and stop it. So they switched. And they started funding research on 2 different vaccines. One was by Jonas Salk, and that's the more famous one. And that's the one where, a vaccine in the normal, like what we think of as a vaccine, where the vaccine is dead virus, and then they give you the dead virus, and your body fights it not knowing it's dead, and then your body knows how to fight it. Mm-hmm. The other one was a guy named Sabin. His was living, and he would give you droplets. He'd put them on a sugar cube, and you put the sugar cube on your tongue, and you'd let it dissolve. His was more effective, but it also had more people get polio.
Which seems reasonable that depending on how well your body could fight it off, some people just aren't going to be able to fight off what he's giving them. Probably.
Right. Now, this came into a problem, whereas the effectiveness was close enough where you'd want the Salk vaccine because the risks were lower.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you have something and you have, like, a 0% chance of getting polio or a 5% chance of getting polio, you want the 0% chance, right? But there was a problem.
Okay.
Both of these vaccines ended up being developed around 1955, and Salk's vaccine went into widespread production around the country. And there was a lab...
Salk's is the one with the live.
No,
the
Salk's
other
is
one.
the dead one.
Okay.
Salk's is I would say the good one.
Yeah.
So it's going around to different labs around the country. It went to a place in California called Cutter Labs. And Cutter Labs apparently was kind of a newer thing. They weren't fully experienced. They didn't have a lot of background in this. And they goofed, and they forgot, in one of their batches, they forgot to kill the virus.
So now we have a rogue live virus traveling around that is being administered as a vaccine, huh?
Yes. So in a batch of vaccines that went out, they injected the kids, and 11 kids died of polio.
Out of how many got ejected?
I don't know what the total number was, but either way, they were like, okay, your virus went into our kids, and our kids died. So now people were like, maybe we don't want that. You know, like, it's not his fault. Like, his idea is the better idea, but they screwed up the production.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, yeah. March of Dimes increasingly tried to fund the Salk one despite that incident, and Sabin was kind of bitter about that. He's like, hey, my virus, you know, yeah, it's alive, but it works. like my vaccine will kill polio. He ended up getting funding by the Soviet Union. Like, they backed him. Soviet Union's like, that's the one we want. So he was around for quite a while because of that. There were interesting ways that there was funding going around, specifically Kaukauna. Kaukauna service stations, gas stations, pledged to donate 1 cent from each gallon of gas sold to polio, which adds up, especially at this point when gas is not like that expensive. 1 cent is a good chunk of that. Every station in town participated. Bowling alleys also had an idea. They put a red pin out. Each time the pins were framed, one of the 10 would be a red pin. And if you didn't knock over that red pin, you were supposed to throw some money in the polio bin.
Okay.
Yeah, you and your buddies are going out bowling. Oh, Chuck, you didn't knock over the red pin. Throw a dime in. So
you got to wonder, like, how much money to know the numbers of how much stuff like that raised. Because I bet you it would be shocking to a lot of people.
I think it's huge because, like, 1 cent from each gallon of gas doesn't sound like a lot, but there's probably a lot of gallons of gas sold.
Mm.
Also, in the 50s, 1 cent meant something.
Yeah.
Like, 1 cent now is a joke, but 1 cent in the 1950s actually meant something.
Right.
So I think they're raising numbers far higher than it sounds like they are. The Salk vaccine, despite that one setback, gets kind of rolled out, and through 1955, Kaukauna kids are getting their vaccine. People all over are getting their vaccine. But Kaukauna specifically, over 500 kids got it that first year. They got the vaccine. It isn't like huge numbers, but it's pretty good. Within that first year, 440,000 kids got it, and all these were covered. March of Dimes covered the cost of everything beginning to end, so it wasn't anything at all. And the only thing they did is they warned the parents, like, at this point in time, like, there are no negative effects as long as it's not screwed up in the production, but we don't know if it's permanent. Because at this point, like, they had only made it, like, in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, we think you get the vaccine and you're not going to get polio, but we can't tell you. because sometimes vaccines wear off after like 5 years. So we don't know. We don't know what kind this is yet.
Or the condition like polio could mutate enough where the
Right.
vaccine doesn't work anymore,
Right.
and stuff like that.
I don't even know if they knew about that yet, but yeah. And it turned out it was permanent, but they did not. They said we can't guarantee that yet because obviously we haven't had a multi-year test because we haven't had years to do it. But it ended up being pretty good. Some odd things happened. Again, like I said, like the swimming pool attendance went down during the polio outbreaks. Library circulation went up. So
Nice.
yeah,
Everybody was trying to figure out what this polio disease was, or
yeah, library circulation went up. So it was pretty good. So it's going to be kind of a longer quote here, but I think this is a really good one, and I want to include it as much as I can. A woman named Doris Van Gumpel later wrote a reflection of her time having polio, and I really want to read this because this explains it so much better than me just giving you numbers and random things and stuff. In July 1955, she was 18 months old and she got polio. She later said, "The first night that I got it, all I did was cry, and my mother just held me. The second night, I couldn't stand on my left leg. The next night, I couldn't stand up on my own, and my arms wouldn't work. After they brought me in to see the doctor, a spinal tap was performed. They were told it looked clear and not to worry. But the final results showed polio. The first 2 to 3 weeks after being diagnosed with polio, I was quarantined just like everyone else who had it. A special unit was set up at St. Elizabeth Hospital. Iron lungs worked to keep those affected in the respiratory areas alive. Therapists worked to keep limbs from tightening up. I went home with braces on each leg, locked at the knee, and off I went. Surgery on my right foot in 1956 helped a drop foot, and I was 3 years old. To straighten my arms, my grandpa gave me a rubber ball to squeeze. It helped. Even today, now at this point, like this is like 50 years later, even today, all my strength is in my arms. In 1958, at the age of 4, our trips to Shriners Hospital in Chicago began. An initial consultation was needed, and I was placed on their waiting list for surgery. In 1959, I went for my second surgery, the first one I got in Chicago. I spent my 6th birthday there and my first Christmas away from home. 4.5 months later, I did get to come home, and without braces. 4.5 months in the hospital. Wow. Our neighbor's son had polio so bad, his mom would take him for walks, and he rode in a buggy-type bed with wheels, which looked kind of comfortable. In 1964, when I was 10 years old, I was placed on the waiting list at Shriners for more surgery, but it took until 1966 to get in. My left foot dropped and was half an inch shorter than my right, which caused me to fall a lot. On May 27, 1966, I went in again. 3 months later, I came home with a full-length cast on my left leg and crutches. When I was 15 in 1969, my left knee was still unstable. My left foot stuck out to the left as I walked. Shriners operated once again and straightened my left foot by actually breaking the bones and turning my foot.
Ugh.
From there on out, she was good, except then in June 1991, my ACL tendon snapped on my left knee while I was at work. This caused my leg to hyperextend, and surgery was impossible. Post-polio limbs are hard to reconstruct, so brace was inevitable. So, to kind of summarize this, she gets polio when she's 18 months old. I'm assuming she does not actually remember being 18 months old, and this is kind of after the fact.
Yeah,
but,
her parents are telling her what happened.
Yeah, but either way, she's in the hospital, she's quarantined, and she ends up getting one of the bad cases. So she has to go repeatedly for these surgeries because she's losing strength in her limbs. And like that's what I think really drives this home. Like you get sick, and no matter how much you get sick and how terrible it is, usually a few days later or a week later, you're good to go again. Mm-hmm. Polio is not like that. Polio, she has to repeatedly, for years and years, go to the hospital, spend months in the hospital to get these surgeries, one of which, as you notice, does not sound great because they have to actually go in and break her bones to reset her bones straight. Mm-hmm. And then when all is said and done, and she's quote unquote better, because of what they've all done, her legs are very like weakly constructed. Mm-hmm. So later in life, once she tears her ACL,
they're like, there's nothing we
can do. So she's back wearing braces on her legs again. So even after they did everything they could to fix her, it ends up not. I mean, she had some good years in there. The quotes, she wrote a whole thing. Like, people can probably find it online. She wrote a whole thing about how, like, when she met her husband, like, her husband didn't even know that she had polio because she was so well recovered. Mm-hmm. And so then later on, when her ACL tore and she had to go back to wearing braces, it was kind of embarrassing because now she was, like, the crippled kid again.
Yeah.
So, but, like, that's the thing. And it's weird, like, how prevalent this was. Kids in the 50s would get this, and many of them are now significantly older. Now they would be like in their 80s. Mm-hmm. But, well, probably more than that. Well, maybe not. I don't know. But whatever they are, you know, there's very few that are still around. Mm-hmm. So we don't really think about polio anymore. But this was serious. Like, this is affecting kids, which makes it scarier. Parents don't like that. And it's not great that its effects last for decades. Mm-hmm. So this was a really terrifying time.
I can imagine. Can you imagine going through that? I mean, we talked a little bit about COVID before, and I kind of feel like this makes COVID seem like nothing because this is way scarier, at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, so I don't want to do that. I don't want to do the COVID thing, but...
But it's a good comparison because everybody has experienced that, so they can kind of see what it would be like.
In some ways, COVID is worse. The numbers were far higher. The death rate was far higher. But I do think there's some serious fear here because with COVID, the people who got hit the hardest were the elderly. And I hate to say it, but society in general is probably not super sympathetic to elderly people getting sick. I don't say that to be mean or cruel. I think that's just kind of how that is.
It's a fact of life because that's just what happens to the elderly. I mean,
right.
We're at that point where things are going to start happening.
Yeah. And then, but with polio, and it's the opposite, and you're seeing 2-year-olds, 10-year-olds, teenagers getting this, that I think affects people emotionally much harder.
Yeah, and I also think that the fact that kids are getting paralyzed from this, that makes it much scarier because controversial thing to say, but there are a lot of people that believe COVID wasn't as big of a deal or isn't a big deal at all. Yeah. And I think with polio, when you're seeing kids in crutches and stuff, you know that it's a big deal. You can't really find it off and say, that's just nothing. Yeah. You know? So
yeah, I say I don't really want to draw the comparison, but it's kind of it's going to come to mind.
Yeah.
In Kaukauna, even though even though the vaccine is being rolled out, it ends up that 1955 ends up being the worst year in Kaukauna. That year, like, summer baseball games are canceled. They're just like, nope, not doing it this year. And by August, cases were going up. August 3rd, Kaukauna had 23 cases. By the 5th, it had 38 cases. By the 10th, it had 46 cases. So the numbers were creeping up as the month went on. We had a health officer in Kaukauna named Robert Van Evenhoven, and health officer is not a position that we have anymore. There used to be was like a city doctor, and now it's like handled by the county health services or whatever they're called. But anyway,
was that created because of polio, or was that just something that they had back then, but they've since phased it out?
They phased it out. No, this was around a long, long time. Like even in the early 1900s, they had that, and they'd take care of like, what they called public health, things like tuberculosis and things. I mean, there were always outbreaks of things going on. So Robert Van Evenhoven, apparently, he had a giant map on his office wall, and he was kind of trying to do the thing I had mentioned earlier, where every time somebody got sick, he'd put a little pin on the map, and he's like, where is this coming from? And like at this point, again, they know it's not from where you're shopping and it's not whatever, but at least figuring out like who's interacting with each other. Like, how can we get this to not get worse? Mm-hmm. And he could not find, like he tried, he's like, it's not consistent. He says there's a few spots that are high. There's Arthur Street on the north side. He goes, we have 5 cases on Arthur Street. So Arthur Street's kind of bad, but on Hendrick Street on the south side, we've got 3 cases. He goes, and these people don't even know each other. So he's like mapping them all. He's like, I have no idea. And he thought it was really weird that the cases tended to be older, between ages of 24 and 35. People were getting it.
Ooh, so it just keeps getting older and older, huh?
Yes. And men were getting it at a much higher rate than women. So he's like, what is the connection between all this? And I don't know that there was one, but he was like, I got to find it. A woman named Jan Schubring in Kaukauna had a reflection later on. I will read her quote. The pool was closed, so we couldn't go swimming. They actually did end up closing the pool in 1955. Lots of sprinklers in use in 55 and 56. Lots of reading being done. Parks were off limits too. In 1956, my parents planned a trip to Wyoming. Before leaving the state, I had to go to the doctor and have a checkup, and my mom carried a note from Dr. Boyd stating that I had the Salk vaccine and was healthy. So go on trips, you had to get it. That year, 1955, the quarantine that summer was so strict, people were not supposed to leave their yards. Kids were not supposed to leave their yards.
Wow.
Yeah. The newspaper interviewed anonymous parents around town towards the end of that summer. One mother said, it's taught the brothers and sisters to know each other. Now they have to play together and they enjoy each other. Before this, each one scampered separately to some organized playground or pool program. So they couldn't hang out with their friends anymore. They had to be friends with their family. Mm-hmm. Another mother said, thank God for TV. The Cowboys keep them quiet for long stretches at a time. Cowboys, not the football team, but like Westerns. Mm-hmm. A third parent said, before the quarantine, a car ride for our kids did not interest them too much. They just wrestled and squirmed all the while. Last night, we took them for a ride to Little Chute, and they were all eyes. They were real quiet and couldn't look enough at the wonders they were seeing.
Like, the wonders of Little Chute.
The wonders of Little Chute, the big, exciting Little Chute.
And this is before they have the incredible
windmill. Yeah. Yes. So that quarantine continued on. But basically what it was, there was an editorial in the local paper, the Kaukauna newspaper, and I wish I had it so I could read it word for word because it's hilarious. It was talking about how teenage girls had developed an addiction to the telephone.
Okay.
Because they weren't allowed to leave their house that summer. So they were like, these teenage girls are on the phone all hours of the day and night. And they're all they want to do is talk to other girls and talk to them about shopping and boys and all this. And I'm like, what the hell? And it was hilarious to me because, again, this is 1955. And I don't know when the stereotype of like girls hanging out in their bedroom talking on the phone started. You know, I don't know if that's even still a thing anymore, but that, you know, it used to be a thing.
Yeah.
But I don't picture that being a thing in the 50s. But apparently
that's where it started, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So for like that summer, they couldn't leave their bedrooms. They were just on the phone all day.
I mean, I don't really think it probably started in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably just when they realized that it was a thing.
Yeah.
Because it got so big because they weren't allowed to do anything else. So.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. The quarantine was lifted at the end of the summer so kids could go back to school. They weren't even sure if they were going to lift it for school, but they were monitoring the numbers, and the numbers had dropped down to such a low level by the end. The polio numbers had dropped down to such a low level by the end of the summer that the risk seemed pretty low, and it worked out okay. It actually did. It did get pretty good. The numbers after that, both locally and nationwide, dropped. The virus, again, the virus and the vaccine, I'm going to keep switching these up. The vaccine was so effective that in 1950s, when it's like thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of cases a year, within 10 years, the cases dropped to near zero.
Wow.
Like, it just, within 10 years, they had basically wiped out polio. The only thing they had left is they had to try to convince the Amish community to get the vaccine. Because apparently, like, the few random outbreaks that did pop up after that were in the Amish community. Because the Amish people, you know, we're not aware of any of this going on. Mm-hmm. And they'd be like, oh, we're all getting polio. So they had to go in and be like, yeah, we can fix that for you.
You just got to let us give you the shot.
Yeah, which apparently, I mean, I don't know what the Amish rules are about that, but I guess they were okay with it. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, I would hope, even if you have an issue with technology or whatever, I would hope that if somebody says, this will probably protect your kids from dying or getting paralyzed, you would think that they would be like, yeah, okay, we're willing to take that risk, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so the final numbers are every year between 1900 and 1955, the lowest number of cases per year was 16,000. Sometimes it was much higher, but that was the lowest. Since 2020, there has been zero, not one. You know, or I shouldn't say not one, because you could get one very random one because somebody was traveling or something. Mm-hmm. But no local, you know, caused by another person in the U.S. So it's essentially wiped out. And because of that, the March of Dimes had to get a new job. And they moved from doing polio to raising money for birth defects and infant mortality. So March of Dimes does still exist. They just don't do polio anymore.
I'm guessing that they don't have people mail in dimes anymore either.
They probably do not.
They probably moved on to something a little bit more
They probably do
efficient.
not. But I know even I don't see March of Dimes much anymore. But I remember when I was a kid, you would like have these little boxes at places, and you could buy like a Tootsie Roll for 10 cents, and it'd go in the March of Dimes box. And so, like, the Tootsie Roll was, you know, a nickel or something, but then the profits went to March of Dimes.
No.
So it was still a thing. It probably is still a thing, but, yeah.
Cool. So now, first of all, so you did this as one of your presentations at the library?
Correct, yeah.
Correct? So what possessed you to decide to do polio?
Well, two things. One, I have a volunteer, and the volunteer, she lived through it. She does not have polio, but she lived through it. And it was something that always kind of interested her. But also, I'll be careful how I say this because I don't want to say it publicly. I don't know that I could say it for privacy reasons. But we do have somebody at the library, not an employee, but somebody who goes there, who had polio. Mm-hmm. And I would consider him a friend of mine. We talk sometimes. And he did survive it. And it's interesting because he was covered in the newspaper at various times. When he was in school, he had to get very special treatment because of how it was. They kind of rearranged things. There was this is not him, but there was one student that actually like took classes by telephone. But he would get special arrangements and special rides and stuff to make sure that he could get everywhere. Mm-hmm. And he had like crutches and braces up through the 70s or 80s or something. Now he's in a motorized wheelchair. Mm-hmm. Like he could walk before, as long as he had his arms to help him. Now his legs basically are withered away.
Wow. So not only that, but it seems like, is that common? Like that later on in life, this is going to hit you and it's going to hit you hard?
Well, that's the thing. Like once you get it, it progresses. And it progresses slowly, but like you're not one day going to wake up and be like, oh, my legs work great today. No, like they don't come back.
They don't come back and they can continue to deplete. So good chances that you're going to be in a wheelchair at some point in time.
Yeah.
Even if you survive it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's sad.
So, yeah. I'm not going to say his name for privacy reasons, but yeah, like getting to know him made it slightly more personal for me because I was like, he is the most optimistic, cheerful person. He's so great. But like I cannot imagine that. I don't think I could be as positive as he is.
You know what they always say though? When you have something like that happen to you, it's like 6 months and then you just get back to being who you were. You stop feeling bad for yourself. You stop feeling like you were a victim and you just become normal again.
Yeah, maybe.
Which sounds weird to probably us, but that's what stats show. So,
but anyway, yeah, so that kind of brought it. But either way, for the purposes of this podcast, I thought it was a topic worth bringing to the podcast because, again, you and I are in our early 40s. Surprise to people. Oh my God, they're in their early. No, okay. But polio is not a thing. Like never in your life were you like, oh gosh, I hope I don't get polio.
Yeah, I do remember, I remember talking about getting the vaccine and stuff probably when we were kids. I think it was a pretty big thing, like make sure you get your polio vaccine type stuff like that.
But it was interesting to me because I think people that are our age and younger, and even slightly older, but definitely our age and younger, are probably not aware at all how much this affected the community. Like, I did Kaukauna specific because that's what the presentation was for. Mm-hmm. But this is not like a rare thing. This is how it affected the country.
Right.
So the fact that the country was basically shut down at various points in time and kids can't interact with other kids and all that, like, I bet you people do not know that.
Oh, I guarantee you people don't know that. In fact, I'm going to think that most people's knowledge of polio is that, well, it's bad and we get a vaccine for it.
Right.
So, and I don't even know, do people still get polio vaccines?
I think so.
Do they? Okay. I didn't know if it was to the point now where we had just eradicated this to the point where you don't even need to get the vaccine anymore.
I suppose technically you could probably get by without it, but I think they still give it.
They still give it. So.
I don't know. Neither of us have kids, so we don't know.
Yeah.
But
so if somebody out there who has kids wants to comment on that, let us know how it works nowadays. Yeah. That'd be great.
But I just that's what jumped out at me is how this was like such a huge thing. And again, I don't want to do the COVID thing. I don't want to do it. But that's what the thing was. Is like when everything shut down for COVID and, whether you agree with it or not, whatever, not the point. The thing is that was a huge freaking deal. Mm-hmm. But as it turns out, it's not unique.
Yeah.
Like we've done this and I didn't know that.
And I knew that. People during COVID, a lot of people did say, go back and look at history. I forget, I was listening to a podcast and the guy read a book about some other I don't think it was polio, but it was some other big breakout.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, I knew that it happened during the Spanish flu. That I knew.
And maybe that, actually, I think that might have been, and he read the book.
Because that was the one that a lot of people compared it to.
Yeah, in the Spanish, I think he read a book about it, and it was like verbatim. The only thing you had to do was change Spanish flu to COVID, and it was everything was exactly the same.
Yeah, but I didn't know it had happened during polio outbreaks, and that is more recent. Like, that's...
Yeah.
People, we don't, but certain people still could remember that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, it's surprising that we as a community don't have that awareness of how polio affected us when, now it's like 70 years ago. It's long, but it's not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. And the people that did have the experience haven't had to deal with it for 70 years. So
yeah,
they probably just barely remember dealing with it, you know, unless, of course, they got polio, then it sounds like it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
So
that was interesting to me, and I just wanted to share that with people because I'm going to assume if I didn't know that our country shut down for polio, other people don't know that. So I figured we should probably share that information.
And I think this is another great thing. Like you don't hear the story of polio, and it's even cooler that we get to hear the story of polio in a city that we know pretty much probably everybody that listens to this podcast can go to. Yeah. So it just kind of makes it a little more personal. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and I also learned that in the 1950s, we had parents that would put their kids in front of the TV all day.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was great. Oh, my kids can't go to the playground? Well, thank God for TV. I just keep my kids here. I'm like, yeah, I guess we've just always done that.
As long as we've had TV.
Yeah.
So, all right. Do you got anything else for this one, or should we wrap it up?
I've got one last thing. I know we're probably running real long, but...
No, it's okay.
But I got one last thing, and I want to show you something.
All right.
And I want you to say something when I show it to you.
Okay.
Say whatever you want. I'm not telling you what to say, but...
All right. I don't think... Oh, Gavin's got a copy of his book.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, me and Gavin already had this conversation, but I think on his podcast, on one of these podcasts, he said that he didn't like the cover, which I think the cover is fine.
I'm not crazy about it, but it's growing on me, I guess.
It's not too bad. The name is still, less than... I'm happy that they at least put a subtitle in there so you actually have a clue what the book's about.
Yeah, so because people can't see it... thanks for that really crappy promotion, Eric.
What do you mean?
You just said, "Oh, he's holding his book." That's not. You didn't tell him what it is. So I'm holding. I'm holding a book that is not out yet. I just got my copies, but they'll be in stores.
I think it's 21st. I think I saw on Amazon.
It's coming up. So by the time you hear this, it'll be out. The book is called Big Safe. It's about some Milwaukee crooks who commit a very bungled heist in Reno, Nevada. Not at all related to Fox Cities Murder and Mayhem, but I thought people would still like to know the book's coming out. Yes, the subtitle is The Milwaukee Crew in the Reno Redfield Heist, which is kind of a convoluted subtitle, but the reason that the subtitle, that is my fault. I will own up to that. And the reason that subtitle is written that way is I wanted to make sure that when people were on Amazon or Google or wherever they were, whether they entered in Reno or Milwaukee or whatever, the title would come up.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be very explicit about, if you're looking for Milwaukee crime, you'll find this book. If you're looking for Reno crime, you'll find this book.
So now
it's kind of it's a rare case of Milwaukee and Reno crossing over because they're nowhere near each other, but
so now I'm curious.
It's equal parts of both, really.
I'm curious. So I noticed that it says the Milwaukee Crew and not the Milwaukee Mafia.
Correct.
What was the reason behind that? Are these people not truly mafia members, or is there questions behind their mafia presence?
One guy is either a mafia member or at least mafia affiliated, but as a whole, I would not say this was a mafia job.
Okay. So they have connections back to the Milwaukee Mafia, but they were probably operating on their own.
Yes, that would be what I'd say, because the person who really instigated it has really no mob connections at all. So I don't think it would be correct to call it a mafia story.
Cool. Well, I look forward to
even though we talked about it on the Milwaukee Mafia podcast, but I don't think it is technically.
Yeah, but I mean, so many of these things that we talk about on all of these podcasts, you got to just kind of accept that some of it might, be slightly
reach the point where the title of the podcast doesn't have to be super strict.
Yeah. So very cool. So like I said, I believe that comes out on the 21st. But if you go to Amazon, you can find it right now. It's up there for pre-order, so you can see it. It's called Big Safe.
Yep.
So it's by your favorite author.
Yeah.
So everybody should go check that out.
Yeah,
and
Big
get
Safe.
Their copy.
Again, I would just say the Big Safe. I think Big Safe sounds awkward, but it is about a big safe. So
everybody should get over and check that out. Get your pre-order placed, and we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Fox Cities Murder and Mayhem podcast. Do you have any idea of what we're doing next?
Well, we'll probably do the Bigfoot next, since you didn't want to do the Bigfoot before.
I think you said you had a murder in there too.
You want a murder?
Yeah, we'll give them a murder before we do the Bigfoot.
Okay, fine. People have to wait for the Bigfoot.
So we'll leave them in suspense for the Bigfoot.
Okay.
So, again, we want to thank everybody for their continued support of this podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Fox Cities Murder and Mayhem. Join us in 2 weeks for another exciting episode of Murder and Mayhem.